right now at the Akron Radio Center. Jeanne Destro in for Ray Horner, and looking forward to a fun conversation coming up right now with Joe Fortunato. He's going to take us to film school again. Joe, how are you doing?
Hey, good morning, Jeanne.
I am excited to hear what you have to say about The Breakfast Club, one of my favorite movies of all time. And actually, since you mentioned to me a couple of days ago that now there's a little controversy about this movie and how it was filmed and some of the themes that came up in it, I went ahead and watched again last night, and I was surprised. I mean, of course, I was still laughing. I absolutely enjoyed that movie, and I thought it was a wonderful film. But I do realize that now, looking at it with 2023 eyes and sensibilities, is maybe a little different than it was back when it was first made in 1984.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't want to dwell on the negative, but today we are talking about The Breakfast Club from 1985. In fact, it was released February 15th, 1985. It was written and directed by the great John Hughes. It stars a whole gaggle of people, including Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, Ali Sheedy. It was actually ranked number one by Entertainment Weekly's 50 Best High School Movies. The movie is really a metaphor about sort of social classism, loss of innocence, and it really has become sort of the quintessential 80s movie. And Molly Ringwald, who plays Claire in the film, has said that it's the universal feeling that we all have, especially in high school, that we're all outsiders and we feel alone, and yet we all want to be accepted. So I think that's a big reason why it has stood the test of time in terms of resonating with people. But as you said, there is some controversy now, partly led by Molly Ringwald herself, when she wrote an opinion piece a few years ago saying that she found some of the scenes problematic in terms of where John Bender is sort of harassing Claire, the character in the film, and he sticks his head up her skirt and things like this, and there's a lot of articles out there about that, and of course that's something we deal with in our society today, that we look at things differently through a new lens, and some of these things were just they're examples of the period at the time, and that wasn't. There's also some homophobic language in the film as well. So these things notwithstanding, it's still a beloved movie and one that a lot of people remember fondly. But I thought it was important that we at least acknowledge the controversy there.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, as I was watching this again last night, I mean, I was seeing that there was some homophobic language. They were sexually harassing the character Claire. But just because we look at that now with some distaste and we say, that isn't right, it doesn't mean, one, it didn't happen then, and two, it doesn't happen all the time now. And so, just because we find it uncomfortable, I think it still makes sense to look at that and to consider what was going on. And honestly, it's such, at least from my experience, it was absolutely a spot on depiction of what it was like to be in high school. All the different, there were the popular kids, and then there were the smart kids, and then there were the kids that were kind of the outcasts and that kind of thing. And it absolutely resonates today. And I walked away from it, one, feeling like, okay, we might express ourselves a little bit differently today, maybe a little bit more sensitively, but that doesn't mean that what was going on in that movie was not absolutely true.
Exactly. And that applies to a lot of movies. I mean, we're not going to, go into a whole list here, but we have movies from the past that deal with racism uncomfortably and like I said, homophobia and, sexual harassment, the treatment of women and minorities. So, this is an ongoing debate, in terms of all of our cultural history. And, it just so happens that The Breakfast Club is kind of a lightning rod for that these days, because it's such a beloved movie by a certain generation, and yet, even like I said, even Molly Ringwald and Ali Sheedy also had some problems with her character sort of having to be all dolled up to attract a boy, and she thought that was a bad message. So there are things that we revisit in these days, but it doesn't take away from the enjoyment that people had. Amazingly enough, John Hughes wrote this screenplay in just about 2 days. Some other things that are of interest to the fans of the film. Judd Nelson improvised that part at the closing of the film where Bender raises his fist in defiance. He was supposed to just walk off into the sunset, so to speak, but Hughes asked him to sort of play around, and when he was done and finishing up, he threw his fist up in the air without telling anybody. Everybody loved it, and it's actually become sort of the iconic symbol not only of that film, but of the 80s and cinema history. I've seen T-shirts with like a silhouette of him, throwing his fist up in the air.
It was fantastic. I really had forgotten a lot about that movie. And when I was watching it last night, I was just sitting there, cracking up, laughing. And I did see the point of why some people today might find it objectionable. But the fact is that really is how it is in high school. And also, I was also reflecting on what great acting. Judd Nelson, that whole ensemble, Emilio Estevez. I'm wondering if, in your opinion, you've been watching a lot of movies and you're an expert in this. Do you think that Judd Nelson ever achieved as good of a role after this one, in his career after that?
Well, certainly not a more iconic role. He might have had some more, adult or meatier roles, as they say. But, he actually stayed in character off camera and was sort of bullying Molly Ringwald even off camera. And John Hughes almost fired him over this.
Really?
But Richard Vernon, who played the teacher, sort of defended Nelson, saying he was a really good actor. He was just, kind of method acting, as they say, trying to get in character. He even went undercover at a high school to sort of convince teenagers that he was a legitimate student.
He'd probably go to jail for that today.
Possibly. Although that's sort of, that's also the original premise of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Not the premise, but that's what the writer of that movie did. So.
Yeah, reflecting on, I can't believe that it only took John Hughes 2 days to write this. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, he was sort of a savant in that way.
Absolutely. I just love all the John Hughes movies. This one and Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles. All of those movies, just to me, first of all, they kind of brand the 80s. But I think they really capture the teenage experience, at least the teenage experience of that time. Maybe not so much today.
Yeah, that's probably true. And, there's controversy with some of those other films, too. But, I know everybody always enjoys talking about casting. He wanted Emilio Estevez to play the role of Andrew. But if he couldn't get him, he was considering, listen to these names, Michael J. Fox, Jim Carrey, Tom Cruise, Matthew Broderick, Rob Lowe, Nicolas Cage. But his fee was too high. And Jodie Foster was considered for Claire.
Wow.
Brooke Shields was considered for Allison. And Rick Moranis was actually cast as the janitor, but the producers of the film so opposed his sort of comic, creative liberties that they had him replaced by the actor that does it now, John Capellos.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I really enjoy this conversation, and honestly, I love this movie so much I could probably talk about it for another hour or so, but I don't have the time, so I appreciate you being on with us this morning. Joe Fortunato, he is our resident film expert, taking us to film school this morning with The Breakfast Club from back in 1985. I'm Jeanne Destro in for Ray Horner. One more time with Stephanie now with traffic.